When most people picture a Wild West saloon, they imagine whiskey, poker, swinging doors, cigar smoke, gun belts, and some dusty piano player in the corner trying very hard not to make eye contact with the wrong customer. What they usually do not picture is lunch. But the old saloon was not just a place to drink. In many frontier towns, it was also a restaurant, a clubhouse, a business office, a gambling room, a courtroom, a hotel lobby, a hiring hall, and sometimes the first real building a new town ever had. And if you walked into one of these places in the late 19th century, especially in a busy mining town or a growing western city, there was a very good chance you could get something to eat. Sometimes it was cheap. Sometimes it was surprisingly fancy. And sometimes, at least in theory, it was free. That free lunch is one of the strangest and most misunderstood traditions in American food history, because it sounds generous until you remember where it was happening. The food was bait. You bought a drink and the saloon gave you access to a table full of beans, bread, cold meats, pickles, oysters, cheese, sausage, crackers, pretzels, or whatever the house could afford to put out that day. The customer thought he was beating the system because the food might be worth more than the drink. The bartender thought he was beating the customer because salty food made people thirsty, and thirsty people bought another round. That was the whole trick. The old saying that there is no such thing as a free lunch did not come from nowhere. It came from a world where lunch was only free if you kept drinking enough to pay for it. In a place like San Francisco, the free lunch could be shockingly generous. Some saloons offered big spreads with soup, beef, potatoes, stewed meats, tomatoes, macaroni, bread, and oysters, all tied to the purchase of one drink. Competition made it worse for the owners and better for the customers. If one saloon offered better food, men went there. If another saloon wanted them back, it had to improve its own table. The result was an arms race of meat, bread, and alcohol. Saloon owners complained that the lunches cost too much, but they could not stop because if even a few places kept offering them, the customers would disappear through those swinging doors and not come back. In smaller frontier towns, the lunch was usually less grand, but it could still be filling. A pot of baked beans with salt pork was perfect saloon food. It was cheap, sturdy, warm, salty, and easy to serve in quantity. Navy beans could be soaked overnight, boiled, sweetened with molasses, flavored with pork, and baked into something that could sit on a table and feed hungry miners, cowboys, laborers, and travelers. It was not delicate cuisine, but it did the job. And that matters because the West was full of men doing exhausting work. Mining, ranching, railroading, hauling freight, building towns, and chasing money through dust and danger all required calories. A saloon meal was not just a snack. For some men, it was dinner. But the range of saloon food was much wider than beans. Some saloons, especially in larger cities and wealthy boomtowns, served menus that would surprise anyone raised on Western movies. You might find chicken soup, salmon, roast meats, lamb, oysters, custard, pies, puddings, or dishes with French names that looked completely out of place beside spittoons and whiskey bottles. French cuisine was fashionable in 19th century America, and even the West was not immune to fashion. If a town had money, the saloon could show it off through food. Velvet curtains, chandeliers, mirrors, and elaborate menus told customers that this was not just a place to get drunk. It was a place to feel important while getting drunk. But for every polished high-end saloon, there were rougher places where the menu was much simpler. Pickled eggs, pretzels, crackers, cheese, sausage, radishes, salt pickles, and sardines, or tiny brined fish, all served the same purpose. They were salty, cheap, and convenient. They sat on counters, kept reasonably well, and encouraged the next beer. That is why so many bar snacks today still follow the same logic. Pretzels, peanuts, chips, pickles, and cured meats are not random. They belong to a long business tradition of making thirst profitable. Oysters are one of the strangest details in this story, because modern audiences do not usually associate cowboys and miners with oysters. But 19th century Americans loved oysters, and the West was part of that obsession. Fresh oysters could arrive by train from coastal cities when transportation allowed it, and canned oysters filled the gap when distance made freshness impossible. They appeared in saloons, hotels, boarding houses, and free lunch spreads, turning up in places that seem almost absurd today. A miner in a dusty town near the edge of Death Valley eating oysters in a saloon sounds like something invented for a joke, but it was part of the real food culture of the time. The West was rough, but it was also connected by railroads, trade routes, immigration, and money. The saloon table showed that connection. Chinese-owned saloons and restaurants could serve chop suey or chow mein. German saloons might offer sausages and sauerkraut. Mexican food traditions shaped menus across California and the Southwest, with tamales, pozole, and other dishes tied to the region's older history long before it became part of the United States. The saloon was not one single food culture. It was a meeting point where immigrant cooking, local supply chains, class ambitions, and drinking habits all collided. And then there was the drinking itself. Whiskey dominates the image of the Wild West for a reason. It was everywhere. But not all whiskey was equal. Better liquor might come bottled from the East or imported from Europe, with a label that gave customers some confidence about what they were drinking. The cheap stuff could be local, harsh, suspicious, and known by colorful names like rotgut, firewater, tarantula juice, coffin varnish, or cactus juice. Some of it was flavored or doctored to imitate stronger or older liquor. The point was not refinement. The point was effect. If you wanted status, you paid for the better bottle. If you wanted the quickest road to disaster, the cheap whiskey was waiting. Beer was also common, and so was champagne, which feels surprising only because movies trained us to imagine the West as nothing but dusty shot glasses. Champagne bottles have been found in old Western sites, including mining towns, because a sealed bottle had a special advantage. You could water down whiskey, beer, or other drinks, but when a champagne cork popped, the customer knew he was getting something real, or at least something that performed reality convincingly. In a world full of fraud, dilution, and rough substitutes, the sound of a cork mattered. Cocktails were also part of the story, though where you ordered one mattered. In cities like San Francisco, a cocktail could make sense. In a tiny, hard-edged mining town, asking for some delicate mixed drink might mark you as a little too refined for the room. People had phrases for that kind of thing, and they were rarely compliments. Still, 19th century bartenders, sometimes called mixologists, made cobblers, smashes, juleps, flips, toddies, and other drinks that use sugar, citrus, bitters, spirits, and presentation to make alcohol more appealing. Cocktails were partly pleasure and partly medicine, at least in the way people talked about them. Bitters were considered good for digestion and whatever else happened to be wrong with you, which was convenient if what you wanted was another drink. The bartender stood at the center of all of this. In some saloons, the bartender poured your drink. In others, especially in older customs, the bottle and glass might be placed in front of you, and you poured for yourself. The price could be fixed, but the pour depended on nerve, habit, and how closely the bartender watched. A saloon keeper could become powerful because he controlled a place where men gathered, spent money, traded information, made deals, gambled, argued, ate, drank, and judged one another. Behind the bar, a man could become important in a town very quickly. He sold liquor, but he also sold access to community. That community was not always warm or romantic. Many saloons were hard businesses run by men who cared more about profit than fellowship. The golden glow of old Western nostalgia hides a lot of cold calculation. The free lunch table, the salty snacks, the watered drinks, the gambling tables, the pretty mirrors, the music, the doors, the smoke, and the food were all part of an environment designed to keep money moving from pockets to tills. Even the famous bat-wing doors had practical reasons behind them. They allowed air to move through smoky rooms, gave adults some privacy from children passing outside, and let people enter and exit quickly while still signaling exactly what kind of place this was. Behind those swinging doors, they were often regular full doors too, because romance is nice, but winter is still winter. Gambling added another layer. Poker was popular, but faro was often even more common in the 19th century. It was fast, social, easy to follow, and dangerous to your money, especially after drinks. Gambling, drinking, eating, and business blurred together in saloons, because the saloon was one of the few places where all those things could happen at once. In many towns, it was the center of male public life. Women were often excluded or treated as exceptions unless they worked there, performed there, owned the place, or entered under specific social circumstances. The gender imbalance in many frontier communities was extreme, and the saloon reflected that. A room full of hungry, tired men eating quickly from crowded tables was not likely to produce delicate manners. Visitors from Europe sometimes described American eating habits with horror, especially the speed. Men seemed to attack their meals, mixing foods, swallowing fast, and finishing in minutes. The old saloon meal could be chaotic: bacon, pie, pickles, oysters, mutton, berries, eggs, radishes, tomatoes, custard, and whatever else happened to be available, eaten not as courses, but as fuel. That speed tells us something important. Food in the saloon was social, but it was also practical. It filled the stomach, absorbed the alcohol, and got the customer back to the bar, the table, the street, or the mine. What makes the Wild West Saloon so interesting is that it sits between myth and business. Movies turned it into a stage for violence, swagger, and dramatic entrances. History shows it was also a place of soup, beans, oysters, cheap lunches, immigrant menus, class display, food waste, marketing tactics, and everyday hunger. It was rough and commercial, generous and manipulative, local and global, masculine and theatrical. A saloon could serve rotgut whiskey with one hand and French-style roast meat with the other. It could feed broke men better than they expected, then make the money back by keeping them thirsty. It could be the first building in town and the last place a man should spend his wages. And maybe that is why the food matters. The food makes the saloon real. Whiskey and poker give us the legend, but beans, bread, oysters, pickles, sausages, tamales, soup, and salty little fish show us how the place actually worked. People did not just drink in the Old West. They ate, negotiated, complained, showed off, gambled, worked angles, chased comfort, and tried to stretch a few coins into a night of warmth and company. So the next time an old Western shows a saloon full of men drinking but nobody eating, remember the missing table. Remember the pot of pork and beans, the oysters on ice or in cans, the pretzels waiting to create thirst, the champagne bottles in a mining town, the free lunch that was never really free, and the bartender watching every plate because every bite was supposed to lead back to the bar. The Wild West Saloon was not just where America drank. It was where America learned how to turn hunger, salt, status, and loneliness into business.